you.
Thanks, Keith. And I see you already have our first question in the chat for those folks here in person, which is what is CBOE, which stands for what is County Boards of Elections. We'll be getting to that in just a moment, but I'm Carol Moreno, the Policy and Programs Manager at Democracy NC, was previously doing County Boards of Election engagement, a little bit more focused now on our hotline, nonpartisan hotline. There's an election this season for folks that might not know, and our legislative work. So I'll throw it over to one of our favorite colleagues, Ann Webb.
Hi, folks. I'm Ann Webb. I'm the Policy Director at Common Cause, North Carolina, and we're really excited to be really in deep partnership with Democracy NC in our work around monitoring county boards of elections. And I've been with Common Cause since about March, and before that was with the ACLU of North Carolina. And I'm just really thrilled to be diving deeper into the democracy space, and so happy to see all of you here. Thank you. And I think I'm passing it over to Adrienne at Southern Coalition for Social Justice.
So I'm Adrienne. I use she, her pronouns. Sorry that I can't be there in person with all of y'all. It looks like an absolute blast, but I will have to be remote for now. And I have been doing voting rights work across the South at Southern Coalition for Social Justice for the past year now. And it's been wonderful, particularly working with folks who are doing all this advocacy and election protection work around North Carolina and around the county boards in particular. So excited to be with y'all today.
And I'll make sure to speak louder for people who are joining via Zoom. And if you continue to have difficulties, don't hesitate to let us know that I need to speak up. And just going to give you a run through of our agenda. So this training is designed for you to be successful advocates in ensuring every vote counts during the ballot counting process, and that you have tools you need to advocate for strong early voting plans in your community. One thing I do want to make clear, the early voting plans, what you're going to advocate there for is early voting plans that your county will have, your county boards of elections, not a plan to vote. We can talk about that later, but making sure that your county has the right amount of sites, that the sites make sense, and we'll dive more into that later tonight. And with all that in mind, we hope what you learned here can also be used in the 2024 general election. And so, as you'll see, we're covering Canvas and early voting. I'll try to take a couple questions at the end of each section, but I do have my colleagues who are monitoring the Q&A and the chat. So we're planning to send you an FAQ afterwards. We just had so many people turn out to this, which is a good problem to have, but do want to make sure that your questions will be answered tonight, just in a different format. And then also we'll be recording this, so you'll get a recording of this, and the resources that we'll talk about, we'll provide that to you as well. And so from the Mentimeter, we've recognized that some of you have done Canvas monitoring before and have been election advocates with us. And so if you're in that group, we hope that this training will be a refresher and that you'll learn new things to advocate for. And for folks that are new, we hope you leave feeling energized to fight for voters and build relationships with your local county board of elections members. And so that said, I wanted to make sure everyone knows Canvas monitoring and advocating for early voting plans are just two pieces of elections advocacy, and that engagement with County Board of Elections is really a year-long process. So I hope as you learn more about these two pieces, you get engaged in elections funding, because that really influences early voting as well. And to start us off, we're going to talk about Canvas and Canvas monitoring and why it matters. And so for that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Ann.
Hey, folks. So what I'm going to talk about is what is Canvas, right? It's a strange, jargony word that we want to make sure we're all on the same page about what it means. So Canvas is the process of determining that all ballots cast in an election have been counted correctly, which sounds easier than it is, right? It requires a number of steps. And you may be used to hearing about Day of Canvas if you've been involved and you've paid attention to what your county boards of elections do. You may have heard about the Day of Canvas. But one thing we really want to emphasize in this training is that Canvas is more than just one day. Canvas is actually everything that happens from the time polls close all the way through when official results are released at that Canvas day. So the Canvas process or the ballot counting process occurs over several pre-Canvas meetings, which includes the processing of mail-in absentee ballots. So there's more to it than just that one final day where they all kind of sign the papers and say, okay, these are the results. These pre-Canvas meetings are especially important to attend if you're able to. Knowing what happens at these pre-Canvas meetings can be extremely helpful to knowing what to expect when we're monitoring on the day of Canvas. From previous election cycles, we know that many of the Canvas issues that we found actually emerged during pre-Canvas meetings when there was a little bit more discussion and debate. When you're able to, we really encourage attending those pre-Canvas meetings so that we can understand what issues that County Board of Elections is coming up against. Right now, for example, we're coming up with a lot of county boards of elections figuring out how to deal with voter ID, for example, and they're going through a lot of the voter ID exception forms. And so some of those issues are percolating in those pre-Canvas meetings. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out when those meetings are. They don't always post them in a really obvious place. So to confirm meeting dates and times and locations, we always encourage calling your CBOE. And we also keep a spreadsheet that includes contact information for your County Board of Elections and meeting dates. And that spreadsheet will be made available to anyone who's doing County Board of Elections monitoring. But we always recommend calling before you get in the car and go anywhere, or assume that you're going to be able to call in or use a Zoom link. Municipal elections work on a slightly different timeline than even year elections. So the ones that are happening right now in 2023, as you'll see on the slide, there are October and November municipal elections. And there are some really important dates to remember because of the different timeline that we're on in this cycle. Absentee ballots for the October municipal elections will be reviewed by county boards starting on September 5th. Sorry, I always forget that it's like, yeah, before. And continue every Tuesday unless otherwise indicated, right? So that's happening every Tuesday right now. Absentee ballots for the November municipal elections will be reviewed by county boards of elections starting next week, October 3rd, and will continue every Tuesday unless otherwise indicated. And then there are additional dates for the day of Canvas. In the 2023 general election, county Canvas for October municipal elections will be on October 17th, coming right up. County Canvas for November municipal elections will be on Friday, November 17th. Voters have until the day before Canvas to correct ballot issues. Right. So if there are people who have provisional ballots or other things that need to be cured, they often have until that day before Canvas. So we're going to go over these dates a few times because there's a lot to keep track of. But this is just your first preview of what the next couple of months looks like in terms of Canvas. So now, Carol, can you tell us about why Canvas monitoring matters?
Thanks so much. And before I do that, I just want for folks that are here in person, maybe think about this, but for our folks that are on virtually, feel free to put in the chat, why are you here today? What brought you to this meeting? And some of you may have heard about this training through our partners at Common Cause or the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. Maybe you heard it directly from Democracy NC. But when we're talking about why this matters, I'm sure many of you at some point in the last year, last couple years, have talked to either a voter or maybe a friend or a family member that has started to maybe have some distrust in elections, or maybe they just have had questions. But we've seen that there has been a wave, especially since 2020, of voters that are being given a lot of misinformation about how our elections are conducted. And so Anne already talked about one of the important reasons why Canvas monitoring matters, which is that you're giving us data, you're giving us information about what is happening when the ballots are being counted that can help us advocate, not just with the local county board of elections and help you advocate as you're talking about your communities, but also with our state legislature, with the state board of elections that oversees the implementation of election laws. And so those are just a couple of the main reasons, but the other reason is to combat election misinformation. If you can go into your community and say, hey, I understand that there are a lot of groups out there talking about ballot machines being tampered. I was at this county canvass. I can tell you that I saw the process, and I can tell you how it works. That's really important. And being able to capture those stories, to share when issues pop up, and to talk to voters and to other people you may know about that process helps us combat some of that election misinformation that's happening, to be a part of observing that process. Additionally, your reporting this year will help us resolve some issues, especially if it's at a pre-canvass meeting, by connecting us back to the hotline, or by connecting voters back to the hotline if that's something that you feel comfortable doing while you're at these meetings. But to give you one example, just last year in the 2022 Canvas program cycle, the program was vital to identifying ballots that were being discarded due to illegible postmarks across several counties. So a lot of the report forms that we received from monitors, we saw that not only was Mecklenburg County dealing with mail delays still, because there were mail offices that were not postmarking the ballots correctly, and then those ballots are being discounted. We were seeing in all of their counties, there were voters that were continuing to see at times mail delays that were 4 weeks long. And so we were able to learn that because of all of the report forms that were coming in. And in Surrey County, Common Cause NC had a monitor out that led to the identification of 2 Board of Election members that refused to certify the election because they didn't agree with current law, violating their oath and responsibilities as County Board of Elections members. In a letter presented to the Surrey County Board of Elections on the day of canvass, the members acknowledged that, sorry, I lost my letter. The members acknowledged that that the election was done in full compliance with applicable laws from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, but they explained that they didn't view the elections laws that were being administered by the State Board of Elections as legitimate or constitutional, and they declined to certify those results or deem them as incredible. These actions did result in the removal from their removal from that County Board of Elections in March of this year. So I think that sent a really strong message to Board of Election members that were refusing to certify the election, that they did take an oath and they do need to conduct elections securely and fairly. And when all the data and the audits are proving that it was, just disagreeing with the law is not enough to not certify an election. So those are just some of the reasons why it's important. If you're a returning monitor and you've been doing this work for years, feel free to also share why you thought it was important, it was helpful. I think we hear from monitors all the time say, I didn't understand that this is how it worked. And sometimes the meetings can be a little quiet. And for that, Keith, can you tell us a little bit about what you all will see when you go out to the meetings?
Yeah, so I can share some of that, and I'll touch up on if the meetings are a little bit quiet, which could be a good thing. But when attending a pre-canvass or a canvass meeting where ballots are being counted, you can expect to see 5 county board members. So right now the makeup, you'll have 3 Democratic county boards of elections members and then 2 Republican board members. There's a chance that you might only see 3, as 3 is like the minimum number that they need to hold one of those meetings. So if you see 3, that's okay. Nothing out of the ordinary there, but also try to keep note. This will be talked about more later, but keep note of who is there. So outside of your boards of elections members, you can expect to see the county boards of elections director, other CBOE staff, partisan observers, attorneys, other advocacy groups, and potentially members of the media. One thing I want each of you to keep in mind though, and for those who are joining us online, is that these are public meetings. You are entitled to be there. And I really hope that you don't feel out of place because that is a place for you to be. So definitely leave here knowing that. And just to give you a feel of what the setup might look like, board members and elections director will likely be seated in the front of the room where they're having the day of canvass or pre-canvass meetings, and other election officials, so they can examine and pass along ballots and ask questions, make determinations, public view, while also maintaining the privacy of the voters' ballots. And we'll get into a little bit of the do's and don'ts. And then you'll probably notice that I repeat things 3 times. It's a trick I get from educators in adult learning in Chigalima. I see you shaking your head. So you'll hear what I'm about to say in a few moments. But the one thing that we want to make sure you do is that you don't disrupt the process. You can ask questions during breaks and you can ask them before the meeting starts to make sure that's okay. But just make sure that when you're canvas monitoring with us, that you're really observing the process and not disrupting in real time. The other thing, Carol, what you said, if these meetings are quiet, it's possible that that's what you'll run into, especially in some of the meetings leading up to day of canvass. If you're finding that they're quiet, that is stuff that we still would like to know. And then you'll never know when things might pop up in the meetings. But generally, if it's quiet, it could be a good thing, but stick with it because the data that we get from you, the input that we get from you will be very helpful. And like Ann was saying earlier, again, saying it again for a 3rd time, what happens in pre-canvass meetings will inform us on what could happen on day of canvass. And Ann, I will pass it over to you to talk about attending meetings.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, before you go to a county board of elections meeting of any kind, you should call and confirm that the meeting is happening at the date and location that you thought it was going to happen at, and to make sure that you're aware of all meetings that are coming up. Once you know what meeting you're going to attend, whether it's a pre-canvass meeting or a day of canvass meeting, or just a regular county board of elections meeting, you're definitely going to want to try to arrive early. Sometimes these meetings take place in rooms that are quite small. I went to one in Wilson County where we were like all squeezed in this little room and there were just like 3 seats for people who weren't on the board, kind of around the space that you had to like drag in from another place. So it's always good to get there early. And introduce yourself to any of the county staff who are there, anyone else who's in the room. It's a good opportunity to meet the folks who are appointed to the County Board of Elections, but also the elections directors and their staff are incredibly wonderful resources and useful to be in touch with, especially if you witness anything concerning, you could follow up and ask more questions. So introduce yourself, and if it's you might ask whether there's any space for members of the public to ask questions or make any statements. That's not super typical, but it's not also unheard of, that there might be some room. And this is just really, think of it as an opportunity to build relationships. These are the folks who make the budget, who ensure robust early voting, who ensure the integrity of our elections, who provide voter education. And we are all working as a group to build relationships across all 100 counties. And so that's really, really beneficial to really view the opportunity as a chance to meet the people and get to know them. So I'm going to pass it back to Carol to talk about some do's and don'ts when you're attending a meeting.
Thanks, Anne. And I won't go over every single one of these, but I do want to highlight some of the more important points. And we are a nonpartisan, Democracy NC is a nonpartisan organization. The work that we all do with our partners around canvass monitoring is nonpartisan in County Board of Elections. So you will want to make sure that you're remaining nonpartisan. One of the things that you also want to do is grab any documentation or handouts that are offered to the public at the beginning if you're there. Like Anne was saying earlier, checking in with any of the staff in terms of what processes there are, if there is any. for providing or for asking questions as a member of the public. You'll also want to ask questions during the breaks if that staff member told you that was permissible. If you need any clarity on the process, and you will want to make sure that you are not, so this is like in the do not category, wearing any political tees or buttons. That's again going back to that nonpartisan piece. And you'll also want to make sure that you are not engaging with or challenging any disruptive individuals. Like we said, there might be some counties where things are pretty quiet. Maybe you will be one of a few members of the public there. There might be other meetings that are a little bit rowdier, and there might be other people attending, and we want to make sure we're not disrupting the process and being distracting. So you'll want to make sure to kind of go over the full list of do nots and do's. One thing we'll share is that we do have a toolkit for y'all that will be provided after this training that goes far more into depth. So if you're ever not sure, you can refer to the toolkit for questions you might have in terms of what is and isn't permissible. You'll want to keep those things in mind. And so with that, Keith, do you want to pull up Mentimeter? So we just have a few points we wanted to definitely make sure that folks understood well. So if you are hopping on a bit late, what you'll want to do is if you're online or if you're in person, you can take out your phones, you can scan that QR code, and then you'll just want to enter that code 44541136. And so we just want to know what are the 2 things you cannot do when being a Canvas monitor. And I'm seeing a lot of folks saying option C.
I don't think it lets you.
It only lets you
pick
pick
one.
Hearing from some folks, there's always something involving tech, I swear.
Yeah.
But hearing from folks, you can only select one option. So I'm only seeing people selecting 2 options, which are both. I'm gonna like let people answer a little bit here.
Mine's not displaying, so.
Gotcha. Thanks for letting us know. So also no worries, if the tech isn't working, we just keep going with the flow. So feel free to put things in the chat, do what works best for you. But I'm seeing a lot of folks that are able to get Mentee at work is they're selecting, you can't display any partisan political objects on yourself, and you can't engage or challenge with other disruptive individuals. Those are the main points we want people to be clear on. We don't want to be contributing to the problem by being distracting. We don't want to be partisan. All right, well, we'll keep moving along. Thanks for folks that are bearing with us as we're trying Mentee today. And with that, we're bringing it over to our SCSJ friend, Adrian. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what people should be looking out for when they're out at these Canvas meetings?
Sure. So going over some of the most important things to note. First, one thing we want to know about is identifying as best you can who is in the room. So which board members are present, which board members are speaking, is the director present, what's the director saying, are there any impacted voters there, any observers, including parties and lawyers. Some other general observations that would be helpful to take down would be whether the meeting seems like it's organized, or on the other hand, if it's a bit more chaotic. If the staff and board members seem like they're welcoming to the public, if they're providing the public with explanation of what's going on, why they're doing what they're doing, walking the public through the steps, or instead, if they're just going through the steps themselves and not providing that sort of explanation or understanding for the public attending. And then also if there's anyone who's being disrespectful to voters or about certain issues, like say absentee ballots. In addition to the sort of general observations, it's also really helpful for you to be taking down any overall numbers, overall counts that they provide. including totals for absentee ballots and provisional ballots, as well as any categories or subcategories that the board mentions, and the numbers that they associate with those categories. If they mention a particular statute, that's a helpful thing to mark down. Any names of voters that are mentioned or challenged, the reasoning the board is giving for the various decisions that it's making, and who specifically on the board is making those decisions. So to sort of break that down a little more specifically, some examples of categories that you might want to be writing down the category and the number of ballots to which this applies for absentee ballots would be things like the number of rejected absentee ballots, how many absentee ballots came in after the deadline. And then on your slide, you also have missing voter ID, missing voter signature, missing witness address, and there could be more. For provisional ballots, some examples of categories or numbers you might be able to take down would be how many ballots had ID issues, how many had registration issues, might be referred to as no record of registration, how many had out of precinct issues or jurisdiction disputes. And then there are some other issues that might come up separate from absentee and provisional ballots, things like damaged ballots, machine malfunctions. Overall, what we're looking for are like copious, thorough notes on what was discussed during the canvass, what happened, things that we can take to help us make sure the proper process is being followed, to help us advocate for voters, both for now and also for future elections. And then if you and the voters are comfortable, it can also be really helpful if you can talk with impacted voters at the meeting, collect their contact information for follow-up. This is a lot of information, and fortunately that Canvas monitoring toolkit that Carol mentioned provides everything you need, lays it out in more detail. So before you attend any Canvas or pre-Canvas meetings, please do review that full toolkit. It includes more detail, more explanation of all these different things that you'd want to be looking for and documenting. And it also covers what we've covered so far. Then after the meeting, don't forget to submit your notes and all the things you've documented to Democracy NC's Canvas report form that same day. Their links are on these slides, and I'll also give them now, demnc.co/BOE report form. That's demnc.co/BOE report form, or ccnc.me/CBOE report. And those links are also in the toolkit, so you don't need to have them memorized. Also, if there are any handouts or papers that the board distributes during the meeting, it'd be helpful for you to scan or take pictures of those handouts and include them when you submit your notes. Then, in addition to documenting what you're seeing and hearing, you should also call the hotline when you believe that an election official may not be following the correct process, or when there's a problem that might disenfranchise a voter. So in those circumstances, you can call this voter hotline. It's staffed by volunteer attorneys and law students and so on to report these situations. The volunteer attorneys can then determine how to move forward. So your call will help ensure that we look closer at any potential issues or incidents. A few examples of times you'd want to call the hotline would be, say, a contentious voter challenge, especially a challenge that's against a large number of voters. Any incidents of intimidation or instances where voters are showing up, like maybe to deal with issues with their ballots. This is perhaps more important because we want to be sure to be carefully capturing these stories from voters and try to connect those voters, if they feel comfortable with it, with the hotline to further make sure we're getting everything documented and that we can provide whatever support we're able to. In the past, we've also had hotline calls about issues with how the canvas is being conducted, like, for example, if they aren't allowing members of the public to enter and observe. That's usually something that we can make an effort to quickly address. So when in doubt, call the hotline. The number is on the screen. It's 888-OUR-VOTE. Also, if you want to hear the numbers, it's 888-687-8683. But the memorable way is 888-OUR-VOTE. And with that, I will pass things back to Keith.
Right, and in true Keith fashion, you'll see the dates recap up here. And just to make sure and restate, Ann, I think this might be the 4th or 5th time now that you'll hear this, is to make sure to call your county board of election, just to confirm that they are having a pre-canvass meeting. And make sure that you know the location. I actually, I won't read this slide out again. But you have those dates. Those dates will be in your Canvas monitoring toolkit as well. But just remember to call your county board of elections. And then in the spreadsheet that was mentioned earlier, you'll also have the county boards of elections phone number. And then you should also have some email addresses too, but definitely make practice of calling. I'll speak for the 3 of us or 4 of us, for you too, Adrian. They're always glad to take phone calls. And so if you call, have a question, they'll definitely be happy to help you. So I know sometimes with myself, making a phone call can feel a little bit anxiety inducing. I don't know if it's a generational thing where it happens to everybody, but it can be that way sometimes. Let's see. Now I did have a slide. Okay, just had to make sure because I hit a slide. I was going to do a question. But just in this interest of time, I'm going to save questions for at the very end. Just making sure there are no burning questions here. I just want to make sure we have time to cover early voting.
Julie actually did get some questions.
Oh, she did? Okay.
Some time.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we'd love to invite our comms team into the chat, I guess off mute, to maybe ask some great questions. We've gotten some folks online. I just saw someone raise their hand. So we'll just take a quick moment. Julia, do you want to give us some questions we've been getting? If they're taking a moment, I'm also happy to name some because we definitely have been answering some in the chat. So I just want to reiterate some of the things that we were seeing people ask. So we talked a bit about that database where we have the spreadsheet. There was a question about how do you find out when and where the meetings are? We've said it. We will want you to call the County Board of Elections office, but we do have that database for folks to refer to as a starting point. And we also do try to track some meetings. So in your report forms, there will be a section where we'll ask you when is the next meeting going to be. We also try to keep you all updated if we hear about a change as well. And some other just general notes, we will be sending out reporting after. Someone did ask a great question. Is there a way to find out what counties might need somebody at Canvas or pre-Canvas? So I could go to a county that might be less likely to have someone in attendance. We are happy to share that information. You can contact us. We'll have our contact information at the end. So if you're a monitor with Common Cause NC, we'll have that contact info. If you're a monitor Democracy NC, we'll have that contact info for you as well. And happy to tell you where we know that there are some folks. We definitely need more folks to be spreading out across counties if possible. You do not have to monitor a canvas that's only in your county. And we'll get to some questions I'm seeing here in a moment. So you don't have to monitor where you live. You can go to a place that is needed. A great question. What if you're an election worker? Can you still participate in monitoring? So that is a great question, Kathleen. What would you say, Anne?
I actually can't think of any reason why you couldn't. You think no?
Well, I was scheduled to be an election worker and was told that I therefore could not do monitoring if I was going to be the election worker.
Mhm.
Were you
I
going to be
said the same
appointed?
precinct. Maybe it was at the precinct, and I don't think it was just at the same precinct. I think it was in the county. I had to make a choice of which one I was going to.
You can't do election day monitoring, but you can do canvas and pre-canvas.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This wasn't canvassing monitoring. This was election day monitoring.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
For a partisan
Yeah.
appointment.
yes.
So I think as long as you're wearing your, well, there can be partisan folks who are monitoring at pre-canvas and canvas meetings too. But for our purposes, if you're doing it with our groups, as long as you're wearing a nonpartisan hat, I don't think there's any reason why you can't go as a member of the public and take notes and engage in monitoring. But if you are planning to do, engage in the elections, both with a partisan hat on and a nonpartisan hat on, then maybe just check in with your nonpartisan organizations, whether that's us or some other group, and make sure that everything is hunky-dory.
Yes, that was a great question. So seeing some folks, and when we do say monitoring, all we do mean Canvas monitoring, elections advocacy. It's in the same umbrella, just to give some folks that clarity. And I think we can take about one more question. I know we've answered a lot of great questions in the chat. So if folks do want to refer to that, we'll also be sending out an FAQs document, so that people can have those responses that we've provided tonight as well. I do see one in person, so I'm going to go ahead and let you ask your question.
Do you have priorities for where you want to make sure you have people? Or is this simply going to be us trying to figure out when and where we can go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely have lists of counties that we have from previous data, either seeing boot camps where there have been mass voter challenges or there has been voter intimidation. We do have that data available. And so first and foremost, because we want it to be accessible, if you all, we encourage you all to monitor and wherever you can. A lot of these meetings are in person. But if you have the ability to drive further, please let us know and we can let you know where there are and aren't monitors that we definitely want some folks to go out to. And I'll say we definitely have seen a lot of issues in the southeast and the eastern part of North Carolina. We always have a lot of folks in the Triangle. We always have a lot of folks in Mecklenburg. Between our organizations, as Anne said earlier, we're trying to reach as much coverage as we can. So we do share information about where we have folks so that we can make sure that we're expanding that coverage. That's a great question.
I have one question, and it's probably the stupidest question that you're gonna get tonight. But, okay, so when you talk about these meetings they have to go over these absentee ballots, so they're sitting in a room going, yes, no, ballots that actually, physical ballots that have been cast, and they're sitting there and making a decision on each and every ballot they have as of that Tuesday. Is that right?
Go ahead, Jane, do you want to share?
They're gonna go through every ballot. I sat through Wake County today. It took us an hour and 18 minutes to do 36 ballots.
So they look at each one
They,
and decide.
yeah, 25 of them there was no problem with. 3 were civilians who were challenged, and then overseas ballots, they have to go through one by one.
And so when you say talk to the voters that may be present, if I were to be silly and crazy enough to vote absentee after all this, if I sent it in and somebody was looking at my ballot, would I know there's a meeting about my ballot and I would go to that meeting?
No,
Or-
if there's a problem with your ballot, they will let you know. And then at subsequent meetings, right, Anne?
Yeah.
Great, that's a good question. And we'll definitely, like I said, share an FAQs doc with the questions we have online.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to make sure, if there was one last question, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, but I think it went out of my head.
Yeah.
There'll be more chances.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. How do you know if like 2 or 3 people are going to one place? I mean, you sign up and then people look and then proceed who's going to that person.
Yeah, so the question for folks online with us was, how do you know if someone else will be joining you in this Canvas meeting? And we do not have a current way to show you if there will be a monitor from another organization. Like I said, we do track that, but you won't see it on your end. It's not necessarily a problem if there's more than one person there, either from our Common Cause organization or from Democracy NC, because sometimes there's so much happening and we read your report forms and everyone shares something different. So it's definitely helpful to have that information regardless. And if we do start to notice a situation where we're having lots of people going to one location, then we'll let people know.
One more thing. So on the don't it said, don't rely on recording, so you can record and video? Oh, okay.
I'm looking, I'm like double checking, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, there's been a lot of things that have been, yeah,
Okay.
Yes, you can.
You can.
You cannot.
You can,
Yes, you
it's,
can.
You can.
In a canvas meeting, it's a public meeting. It's different than in the polling place,
but you wouldn't, yeah, be able to get access. to
but you
sensitive-
can't have like, you can't be taking a video where you would see like the ballot, right? Like, if the room is such that you can't position yourself to do it in a way that protects ballot secrecy, then they could set limits on it.
oh,
But if you're just recording audio, they shouldn't be preventing you from doing that.
Yes, all right, so Keith, would you like to move us along?
Yeah, we can move along. And I think I'll just do a little bit of framing, but we're gonna shift over to early voting advocacy, and Carol's about to talk about it a little bit more. But as I said at the top, when we're talking about early voting plans, we're talking about the actual plans that your county boards of elections create and make decisions on. So things like where early voting site is, hours, how many early voting sites there are. We're not talking about like making a plan to vote early. So I want to make sure throw that out there. There's a little bit of confusion in the previous training, so I wanted to make sure to get ahead of it for tonight's training. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Perfect. Alrighty. So, as Keith already shared, when we're talking about early voting, we're talking about the early voting plans that are adopted by the county boards of elections, that will determine the site locations, the hours, and the access that is given to those voters. So as many of you who've maybe been doing elections work in some regard, whether you've done get out the vote or you've been a poll monitor, if this is your first time, you're interested, been out there voting, you know that early voting in North Carolina is really popular. And it is actually the most popular voting method for North Carolinians. And one of the most common reasons why a voter's ballot may not count is due to voting at the wrong precinct on election day. So we know that early voting is one of the best options for voters because they can go to any early voting site. They don't have to just go to an election day, to their election day voting site. And this is also very helpful to voters that are voters that have families. They may have a long work schedule and maybe they can't make it out on election day or they don't get it off. They choose early voting and maybe they lack reliable transportation. And so in those situations, early voting makes it a little bit easier for them to find that time. So one of the reasons why early voting matters is that it does help reduce long lines at the polls. We're giving voters more options, so they're not having to wait in line for hours on end. And we still see that sometimes, especially if you've been a poll monitor, you still see situations where those lines are pretty long. But it does reduce that wait time, encouraging the voter to cast their ballot. Another reason is that it means more opportunities for voters who are marginalized, that might have lack of access. And so that means flexible hours, as I was saying. I often think about student voters. You know, you can give them a prize and they still might not want to go out to vote at times. And there are students who are very engaged, but they don't have the time or they don't have the transportation. So having that flexibility, especially with their busy the class schedules, and having a site near them is especially important because that makes it more likely for their ballot to be cast. And another great option is that early voting offers same-day voter registration. So with early voting, we can do that. A voter can show up, and as long as they can provide proof of residency, they're able to cast their ballot. And that's excellent. And again, thinking about students, especially helpful for those students to be able to use the same day registration process. So those are just some reasons, but one that we saw even a couple years ago, in terms of why it was so important is that we had an organizer out in Western Piedmont region who saw a situation and now I'm losing track of the county. I'll think about it in a moment. I think it was maybe Union County, where they didn't get the budget they needed. And so they actually were not able to keep 3 early voting sites open. They were closing it down. And upon looking at some data, we knew that those sites were used most often by voters that were Black and brown, that were then gonna have to travel a much farther distance to use the one early voting site that was available. And we were able to get those sites reopened, but it's really important when we also think about what communities are being impacted when the decision is being made to close a site. So with that, I'd love for you to tell us a bit more, Keith, about like who's making decisions, how does the process work, and like how are we able to engage?
So early voting plans are often crafted by or with major input by the paid county boards of election staff, such as the board's elections director, other staff members, and then they have to get final approval by the members of the county boards of elections. And so the vote at the county level must be unanimous to approve the plan. And if that unanimous vote doesn't happen, any single county board of election member can submit an alternative plan to the state boards of elections, which will have final authority on what that early voting plan will look like. So if this happens, the state boards of elections consider whether or not the county has provided adequate coverage of the county's electorate, and if the plan disproportionately favors any party, racial, or ethnic group, or a candidate. And so when you're thinking about early voting advocacy, individual county boards of election members, and not just the board as an entity can be considered kind of like your main targets, people to talk to. In the past, our partners at SESJ, Southern Coalition for Social Justice, have also offered to help board members craft an alternative plan, and it's important to let them know that these resources are at their disposal in case this happens. If you start hearing mumblings about a county board of elections not being able to pass a unanimous early voting plan, definitely put that in your BOE reports, and that way people like me and our colleague Tyler Day will see it, and then we'll be able to escalate it, and then also give you a call and make sure that you have resources at your disposal as well. And then for the other pieces, state board of election members can be thought of as kind of like secondary targets. That's just in case that your county does not have a unanimous plan. And then also county staff are also good people to talk to as well. Sometimes they're the ones doing the research, looking at buildings, and making recommendations on what sites to use. So definitely make sure to build those relationships with county boards of elections members and then staff. And then that other thing that I was mentioning earlier about kind of year-round elections advocacy, doing this on a year-round basis will really help kind of better understand the process. You can explain it to people in your community, and then also get others involved and show that, you know, you're attending meetings and people are paying attention, and then building in community input. And with that being said, I have another Mentimeter question, and this is, what happens if a CBOE or county boards of election cannot pass a plan? And I'll read out some of these options because I could not get the text to be bigger. So option A is the CBOE director decides what the plan will be. B, the state board of elections decide what the plan will be. And C, the CBOE staff decides what the plan will be. And also, do want to shout out the people who let me know that the previous Mentimeter question, you couldn't select more than one option. When I used to work with teachers, or with my colleagues too, I would do things around the office to see if they're like paying attention. But what I would have said if I didn't completely get my hand away was just to make sure that everyone was engaged and paying attention. So definitely appreciate that. So you got 24 responses on here. Yep, state board of elections decide. Again, it's another thing where I repeat things 3 times. And if that happens, just follow through with, what's going on, attend those meetings, and then, keep paying attention, keep reporting on it, until the end, until you get that final plan in place. And let me make sure I'm all oriented here. And I'm gonna pass it over to you
Yeah.
about what makes a good plan.
So, when you're advocating for an early voting plan, there are some key things that we recommend looking at. Obviously, you know your community best, and folks who live in that community know it best, but there are some sort of, big highlights that we want to be paying attention to. Does the proposed early voting plan include locations that are convenient for, young people and student voters in the surrounding community? One of the things that we've seen challenged a lot recently is whether there should be early voting sites or even election day voting sites on college campuses. And that's a really high priority issue. Are there robust weekend voting hours over the full 17-day period? Does it include multiple Saturdays and Sunday voting? That's an important question to ask. Are there satellite voting locations that can serve historically underrepresented communities, including Black voters and other communities of color? Are there voting centers that have adequate and accessible parking, curbside options, and space for poll workers to perform their jobs? We want to make sure that there are options for everyone to come and use early voting, and that other community concerns are being considered, right? How the sites are distributed around the county, et cetera. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Carol, to talk a little bit more about who makes the decisions about early voting plans so that folks can understand where the levers of power are.
Thanks so much, Anne. So just give me a second. So I think we talked a little bit about makes the decisions, but I'll go over it for folks' understanding. So you'll have the 5 members of the county boards of elections. 3 of them will be with the party of the governor right now. It's Democrats, 2 are Republicans. And that will change next year. So please come back and we will train you again. Don't want to get into that right now. But they will essentially, with consultation from their director, decide what that plan will look like. And then if there isn't any agreement on that, then they will send, like, for instance, if one of them decides not to vote for the plan, then it'll go to the state board of elections, and then the state board of elections will ultimately decide. So with that, I will talk a little bit about what you can do to make those plans good. Does that sound good, Keith? All right, awesome. So just to talk about some plans, and we're not, for many of those folks who've been with us before, you'll know that we typically have our own early voting advocacy dedicated training. For the primary election, early voting plans are going to be due at the end of this year, so in December. And so while you all are monitoring the canvas, while we're doing the municipal elections, you will start to see at regular county board elections meetings that those members are starting to discuss about the 2024 primary early voting plans. And so some of the things that you can do is, again, finding out when your county boards of elections is meeting. We've talked about that a lot. We've got a database with some dates for you, but it's always good to just call them, because sometimes they cancel those meetings and they're like, no one ever comes to these. I don't need to tell anyone. And then people have shown up before and they're like, what? It was canceled. So always give them a call first. You can check our Airtable also as a starting point. That's where we'll have the contact information. And we want folks, this goes for Canvas and for early voting advocacy, to choose the option that's most accessible to you, whether that's attending virtually or in person. We do encourage you to attend in person because oftentimes you can't, sometimes there's audio issues and you can't hear what's going on. And we also want you to think about this as a year-long form of engagement in your communities. So it's much easier to build that relationship with those board members if you're there in person, asking also what's a comment process like, so you can ask them questions about that plan. And then you'll want to gather intelligence. So you'll want to ask them or ask a county board elections member or a director or any staff member that you're building a relationship with. What is the schedule and process for making a decision? Will they consider or support opening some early voting sites on a Sunday? We know that Black and brown voters tend to use Sunday voting the most often because of a lot of programs such as Souls to the Polls. So that is like maybe one way to advocate for a Sunday early voting hour. But you also want to talk about like what analysis did they do when considering shutting down an early voting site. And this is stuff that we're happy to also provide you data on and support. We have done analysis on and can do county specific analysis on what groups might use early voting sites. And oftentimes what we hear from county board elections members is, well, this site had a really low voter turnout and this is our budget. So we have to shut this site down because no one's using it. And what do we also know about voting behavior is that it's typically Black and brown communities that are most impacted by that because they might see a lower voter turnout, and often that's due to reasons like lack of transportation or other barriers to voting that they might face. So being able to ask those questions, oh, no worries. I know it's getting late. Being able to ask those questions, like what did they do to essentially evaluate if they're choosing to cut a site and why are they cutting that site? And then another thing you'll want to do is organize. So if you, we want you to be advocating for the sites that are best for your communities. We don't want to say, always make sure that all early voting sites are kept open because sometimes that's not the best option for your community. But if you do see a site that's being closed down, or if that county isn't offering any weekend hours or Sunday hours, then you'll want to organize. And that means either talking to each other, talking to other groups in your community that you believe would be allies, and getting them to show up to those discussions and provide public comment. And you can even have a meeting with the county board of elections members with those supporters where you can talk to them about, hey, we understand you want to close this site down. These are our concerns with having it closed down and why we think you should keep it open. And we've seen that be really effective in organizing around better plans. And even in this last year of early voting advocacy, because a lot of the great work that our monitors, and we like to say advocates, because yes, y'all are reporting back to us, but you're also there to advocate for your community, whether that's making sure a ballot is counted or making sure a site is open. You want to be building that relationship, advocating, meeting with them, and that's definitely been effective from what we've seen in getting them to adopt the best plan. And then Adrian talked about this a little bit earlier, or it's getting a little late, folks. It might be misremembering who talked about it, but someone said that you can have them submit an alternative plan. So if there is one board member who's like, I'm a strong proponent of weekend hours, but my like fellow board members don't agree with me, they can submit an alternative plan and you can meet with them and discuss that. And you can connect them to our lovely friend Adrian, who can help them draft that presentation to the state board elections. And the more people you can bring, the clearer it is that that early voting site is important to your community for those hours. And just remember, it's important not to just advocate for additional hours because you want to, but make sure that that is actually in the best interest of your community, that you're able to get that assessment from the people you're discussing and advocating for. And in a year with tight election budgets, just keep that in mind in terms of how they might be prioritizing their budgeting for that site. And lastly, just to kind of wrap this up, you'll want to follow the process. So keep showing up to those county board elections meetings, asking those important questions. You can also ask them to add you to an email list. So, oh, sorry. Okay, I'm seeing some folks can't hear me. So you can also ask them to add you to the email list. A lot of county board elections have listservs, and sometimes they can add you on, and you can get updates of the meeting notices, and you can stay in the know in that way. And by the time of the vote, you should have a sense of what will happen based on everything you've learned. If your county plan does go to the state board of elections, then you'll want to follow along with that process as well. And then probably the most important thing, maybe not the most important thing, but important to us is reporting back. We definitely want to see your reports. We want to know what you're learning. We want to know how we can help you. Sometimes we might even contact you if you've submitted a report and we need more information. But know that we're here to offer our help, and Keith will be telling you about some of the resources we have available. But that information also allows us to share those reports with one another and discuss where we might be able to organize and connect you with other groups that are wanting to maybe do some of the similar work in your community. And as a reminder for our folks, you might not have seen the chat, we have 2 report forms. So if you're with us tonight with our lovely friends at Common Cause and C, you'll want to use the ccnc.me. If you're with our Democracy and C, which is us friends, then you'll want to fill out that report form. And so now Keith will tell you about some of the things we can provide to you.
Yep. And all right, so cards on the table. I made some changes to the last of this, and I did not make into my notes, but I'm going to do my best here. And so here, what you're going to receive after the training. So you'll get the recording from tonight, so you can watch it. You also you've been hearing a lot about the Canvas monitoring toolkit. I promise it's real. It will come to your inbox probably later this week, maybe early next week. But that toolkit has everything that we talked about here tonight, and then also a lot more information. And so I'm sure someone had said it earlier, make sure that you review the Canvas monitoring toolkit before you go and monitor your first pre-Canvas meeting. Has a lot of good information in there, and then I'll make sure that it has contact information. So if you have questions, because I'm sure some questions might come up as you're reading it, you'll be able to reach out to any of us here. And then we'll also have an early voting toolkit. And so that one also kind of has what Ann and Carol covered just now. Again, some more in-depth information, but a lot of good ideas and some reminders for you there. And then you've heard about the spreadsheet so many times, with CBOE contact information and meeting schedule. It won't look like, well, it'll look like a typical spreadsheet. It's an Airtable link. I just like to say spreadsheet because that's how I can understand it. And that's probably how you'll see it as well. But it's the same thing as a spreadsheet, and it just has all the CBOE contact information, phone numbers, some emails, and then also meeting schedule on there too. Just remember to give your CBOE a call to confirm those meetings. And some of the things on here that I don't think made it onto the slide, I'll cover this one first. As a reminder, DMNC resources can be found at dmnc.co/elections advocacy. And I'll make sure that we'll share Common Cause resources as well in our follow-up email. And then also don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions you have. If there's a thing that you think you need, and I used to tell this to teachers all the time, just reach out to us. Chances are we might have a resource that you're thinking about. So please, again, reach out to us. I sound like a broken record. Reach out to us.
And if you don't mind, Keith, there's one thing I'll just highlight for folks on our website, specifically for early voting, which is our early voting advocacy profiles. And so if you're looking for data and you're working in a county and you are hearing about a change in an early voting site and you want to know who voted there, what demographics, what was the turnout, we actually have profiles from last year in select counties that can provide you that information on our website. And if you're working in a county where we don't have a profile, like Keith was saying, if you're thinking of a resource you need, we can probably provide it. We could work on creating one for y'all as well. So just know that that data is always available and you have some of that already at your hands on our website.
Thanks. And before I take it over to you, Ann, for upcoming events, one thing that we're doing at DMNC are upcoming vote protector trainings. We'll probably see some emails here, but in the municipalities that we're focusing on is Charlotte. And then I'm going to butcher the name of this one. Name, is it Fuquay? Fuquay, thank you. Oh my gosh, you guys corrected me so fast. Thank you. Fuquay, Marina, and then Greenville and Fayetteville. So there'll be trainings there, and we're focusing our vote protector program for the municipal elections on those communities. So more to come on that. We'll make sure that you get those emails as well. And then Anne, I'll turn it over to you for Common Cause stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, just wanted to highlight a few other events for folks who are interested. If anyone's tuned in from Fayetteville, there's going to be an All Politics Are Local town hall on September 28th. That's just coming up in a couple of days. The contact for our organizer there, Lisette, is on the slide. And then we have an ongoing series of town halls around the state called Unite NC that we have lots of partners involved in. And October 5th, I'm realizing I can't remember where that one is, but if you go to ccnc.me/UniteNC, you can find all the upcoming dates. And then we have a Common Cause NC member fall call coming up on October 3rd as well, and that's statewide and online. So look for that at ccnc.me/fall call. And thank you to Alexa for reminding me that Robeson County is October 5th for our Unite NC town hall.
All right, and I already covered this again. Like I said, I made some changes to this and it didn't make it into my notes. But those are all the resources that will be hitting your inbox soon. And just because I love doing this at the end of trainings, you'll probably get a feedback form too. It's one thing that we discussed. But this question on the Mentimeter is, how are you feeling after tonight's training? You should only be able to pick one unless I didn't do that, but ready to do this is one option. This is a lot of information, but I know who to contact when I have questions. And this last category is just help. You can think of it as like one, need a little bit more help, or two, like Keith, you really should have done a better job. And I will not be hurt if you put that. Again, when I did professional development with teachers up in Massachusetts, they let us know it was not good. But seeing a good mix of ready to do this and then know who to contact when you have questions. So that's reassuring. So yeah, I guess I'll end the Mentimeter there. And I know there are a couple things.
Do you want to give
Carolyn?
mhm.
Yep. And Carolyn, before I turn it over to you, I just want to make sure that I share out contact information. For myself, you can reach me at elections@democracync.org. And then Adrian, who spoke about Canvas monitoring over at Southern Coalition for Social Justice, Adrian's email is there. And then Tyler Day, who is Anne's colleague over at Common Cause, well, our colleague really too. Tyler's email is there as well that you can reach out to. And then, yeah, Carolyn Bunker, I'll turn it over to you. I know you had some things you wanted to add.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Bunker. I am a member of the Board of Elections, of Guilford County. And I just wanted to give you a little additional information. We've been looking at absentee ballots that have been coming in to Guilford County, and not one of them has been postmarked. Not one of them has been postmarked. And we have contacted the post office, but these could be coming from any post office throughout the United States, really, as an absentee ballot. But I did want to let you all know about that. The second thing is, when the board members are looking at absentee ballots, we have the option, particularly when we have a lot of absentee ballots coming in, like during a presidential election, we have the option of turning those ballots over to the trained staff at the Board of Elections. And anything that comes through as a perfect absentee envelope with the signatures and the witnesses and all of that, if that's perfect, that passes on through. Anything that would have a question or a problem with it, then we would see as members, as the 5-member Board of Elections. So I just wanted to let you know that there is an option there for the staff to do some of that work, instead of having a board meeting that lasts, 10 hours.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Oops.
If I can just jump in and say, Carolyn, correct me if I'm wrong, or anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but the postmark issue is really, it's only an issue if the ballot is arriving after election day and you need to determine that the postmark was there by election day. Otherwise, if a ballot arrives by election day or on election day, the postmark is not consequential. So just wanted to help folks understand. That's
You're absolutely correct there. What we're trying to do is to avoid a train wreck during that last period. That they would be coming, the absentee ballots would be coming in. Yeah.
I don't understand. This is Tina Berryman. I don't understand.
So we can answer this in the FAQ in writing. It might be a little easier to follow, but the basic gist of it is that mail-in absentee ballots can be counted if they're postmarked by election day, even if they arrive for 3 days after election day.
But there is a postmark. There is something marked on there. That's what I don't understand. When you say it's not postmarked, I'm like, how do you get a ballot that's not postmarked?
The post office
doesn't stamp it.
But that's not true for next year, correct?
Right. We'll do lots of trainings on that next year.
Yeah. Next year will be entirely different and new. That's
So I
what we
think
need now.
hopefully that at least makes things a little bit clearer.
The post office are having major problems right now. I know people who work in there. Matter of fact, I was not getting my letters that were being returned saying that I didn't have a mailbox. So I don't know how they're gonna handle that, but I've actually told my state representative about that. So that is an open issue. That is not resolved yet.
Great. And I know we're definitely have some more questions, but it's 7:25. We're gonna spend maybe 2 minutes on questions, throwing it over to Alicia.
Yep.
Just to make sure that we can answer some of these others. Alicia, are you able to tell us any other questions we should be highlighting tonight?
Yes, a few that come to mind. One was, is there a way to find out what counties might need someone at Canvas or pre-Canvas so they could go to a county that might be less likely to have someone in attendance?
Yes, and we'll include this also in the FAQs, but you'll want to contact us if you have that question. And we can let you know if there are like additional people, but don't be concerned if you see other people with you, and we can also let you know where to prioritize based on previous data we've received.
Another question, I believe you already may have touched on this, but information on will the toolkit be sent via email or text message?
Yep, it'll be sent through email. We won't do that to your text inbox on your phone. You'll get it through email.
And this is more for our panelists. Any other questions we want to touch on, folks, tonight before we let folks go? Okay. All right.
All right. Well, now reached the part, I don't know why I didn't make notes to end out on. But contact information is on the screen. You'll get a follow-up email with all the stuff that we talked about. But I guess I will say thank you so much for spending hour and a half of your Tuesday with us. And I'm glad that we got you out of here before 90 minutes. So that's a big win. And then also good that you guys also feel good about the training. That's always good to see. And also, if you have any feedback that you want to give, most likely have a feedback form, but you can also email me at the elections@democracync.org with any feedback you might have. Because I read or monitor that inbox. So love to see any questions or comments come through. I'm sure my colleagues as well. Their email address is on here too. But thanks so much, y'all. Hope you have a good night.